So, today I want to talk about the mess that is the Biden administration's infrastructure and social safety plans. To be honest, I've really been avoiding this topic for a while, mostly because the drama and theatrics of corporate controlled Democrats holding up all of the works and consistently capitulating to Republican half measures and false compromises has amounted to practically nothing happening at this point. We've just seen this consistent rhetoric from the likes of Manchin and Sinema and all of the rest, who have all claimed the impossibility of eradicating the filibuster, who have all claimed it's impossible to pass anything that might even remotely help people in their daily lives, and who are the same ones who have prevented any spending that doesn't directly influence or help corporations and the multiple industrial complexes that make up the United States and their global hegemony. That said, the infrastructure in the United States is something that I think is still worth talking about. Water pipes need to be replaced. A lot of them still have lead in it. The electric grid needs to be repaired and completely redone. A lot of the infrastructure on that is dissipated. Texas is absolutely a mess, for example. And we need to be working on these type of projects. Public transit still needs a ton of funding because a lot of places still, it's really difficult to get from one point to another for an average person. And the climate really does need to be addressed in all of these different topics. Infrastructure at its core is what defines people's conditions. And despite the shift towards trying to make everything about the economy and labeling infrastructure in terms of economic and job related terms, which the government has a consistent history of doing, the most important infrastructure really does determine people's lived realities on a day to day basis. And we just have far too many instances across the United States where infrastructure is truly crumbling. And the poorer the people that live in an area, and the higher the population of people of color in an area, the more likely that infrastructure is collapsing in that particular area. And that really does need to be addressed and dealt with because all of these things do affect people's lives and how they live their daily realities. And yet, we're in a place where at every turn the budget keeps getting slashed on these bills, again, by the same people that we talked about before, the corporate Democrats like Sinema and Manchin, and all the Republicans, to be honest, as well. Despite that being the exact opposite of what is recommended to actually fix any of this. This is all happening at the same time that some of the wealthiest people in the world are concentrating their wealth at absurd levels. Elon Musk just recently earned $36 billion, dollars, I believe, and it was like a day. And when you think about that, and you think about the absurd disparity in wealth, and the fact that that money alone could probably pay for a few years worth of one or two different types of infrastructure getting repaired or fixed. That is absurd to see privatized and collected in the hands of one individual. While they are especially not giving anything back to the world, while the world allows them to live a luxurious life of oligarchy. And the funny part of all this is that the majority of the current amounts of the bills that are still left intact tend to support corporate interests, while the parts that would protect the climate, would help protect individuals, seem to be the ones getting eradicated. When we look at what's going on here, we have to recognize that back in March, it was well established when the first parts of these bills were being put out that America's infrastructure was labeled at a C minus from the American Society of Civil Engineers reports. It was at a D plus before that under the Trump administration. I'm not sure what exactly raised it from the D plus to the C minus. But what I will say is, ignoring that grade that kind of comes off as somewhat arbitrary, the reality is that it was determined that it would cost $5.9 trillion dollars over the next decade to bring bridges, roads, airports to a safe and sustainable level. And that's about 2.6 trillion more than what the government and the private sector already spend. So we're talking about an increase from what was proposed back in March of $2.6 trillion dollars to almost $6 trillion dollars is what was required just to get roads, bridges, and airports at safe, sustainable levels in a decade. And yet, here we are. This is what was proposed back in March. A roughly $2 trillion plan that was going to improve things over 8 years. And the money, the exact amounts aren't really the important amount. It's just the overwhelming amount of it not being enough, you know? And the transportation was at 621 billion. Home and care services and workforce was at 400 billion. Manufacturing was going to get 300 billion. Housing was going to get 213. You know, and these numbers were up there. And when we look at what we're at now in terms of the infrastructure package, the full package is less than what the Biden administration was going to put in to and dedicate to transportation alone over the course of 8 years. Now, within 5 years, we have a $550 billion package, which is inadequate. And we're seeing the research and development that was supposed to go into developing green energy completely dissipated. We're seeing the investing in housing, schools, and buildings completely just eradicated. We're seeing the home and community based care for people completely eradicated. And the clean energy tax was completely eradicated from the bipartisan bill. This isn't a bipartisan bill, this is a corporate bill that's holding up the works and preventing very popular and necessary changes from happening, and it's being hidden under the guise of democracy. Roads and bridges had their budget slashed, railways had it slashed. Electric vehicles, while not my favorite concept because public transportation would be a much better thing to see manifest in much larger amounts, had its budget slashed. The point of the matter is that all of the things that are affecting people's lives got their budgets completely slashed, and they already were inadequate to begin with. And I'm going to be real, the $55 billion going into water infrastructure over the next decade is one of the ones that I can very strongly speak on and say that it's far too inadequate. You're not going to be able to replace all the lead pipes. And this, of course, all assumes that honestly, that all of this money gets exactly where it needs to be because, you know, government corruption still exists, things slip through the cracks, finances end up, you know, misallocated, things end up costing more money than was expected, things go wrong. And so when you're allocating for this, I don't really think that the water infrastructure or any of this, to be honest, is going to end up directly in the places where it needs to be. My biggest fear is it's not going to be replacing water in, you know, electric grids in parts of Texas or in Jackson, Mississippi, or in areas like Flint, Michigan, but we're going to see it end up in the hands of corporations who are going to pocket a lot of the money in the name of improving these structures and end up raising the cost anyway on what gets sent to people because the infrastructure has been slightly improved. Now, with broadband, I as another one, you know, I want to talk about that more in depth about how much that's becoming a necessity, especially as people are moving in the direction of working from home a lot more. But even without that, the fact is that we live in a world where having the ability to connect to a Wi Fi connection, having some sort of Ethernet connection, is practically a necessity to survive and function for a lot of people. And it's really dismissed as the internet being this luxury, but the fact of the matter is, more and more things are moving online. And in a lot of places, you still can't get access to stuff without an email address. And these are the things that we're looking at slashing. And so, yeah, there's some nice things in here, and I'm not trying to take away from that, but it is far too inadequate. And when we look at the other side of things with the Build Back Better bill, you know, you have this thing where Manchin basically came in and started shifting the policy where instead of electric utility companies being penalized and given fines for switching that when they use fossil fuels rather that they'll instead give a tax credit to those who use clean energy. And the problem is that's not going to solve things. If the externalities and the real cost of using these fossil fuels is not applied to these companies where they can keep passing it on to other places, they're going to continue to keep using these sources. And we know that Manchin's got, you know, a lot of funding coming from a lot of donors that are invested in the coal and oil industries, and it's unsurprising that this kind of thing just keeps happening. And he's the latest scapegoat with all of it when it comes to constantly pushing us back further and further from the goals that we need to reach in terms of the climate. And so what got taken out because of Manchin and Cinema? in all of this? Well, you got paid family leave taken out. You got free community college taken out. Because, one of the things that a lot of people who voted in the previous election cycles was worried about was student loan debt. And Bernie had gone under the policy of potentially eradicating that. And Biden still has the ability to get rid of most of the federal debt in a wave of a pen. And he chooses not to because that's not important and that's not a priority. And free college and free education for people to get new training and to re-educate themselves or to explore education in new ways is something that's being denied to people. And this is something else that I feel like needs to be talked about more. Dental and vision are still not being covered. Now, hearing was added in to the medical costs of Medicare coverage, but dental and vision are still not part of that. Somehow, dental has escaped the capacity of being recognized as an important medical necessity when it's how we eat. But the fact of the matter is that dental and vision isn't being covered. Prescription drug prices are not being negotiated. These are the things that we're willing to leave out that'll help people in the long run and are very popular ideas that are just being pushed to the side. And yeah, we're getting universal pre-K added because it's been recognized that people who want to go back to work, huge sectors of the population that they need to get people back into the industries, need people to take care of their kids. And I hate to say it, that's probably the main reason why something like that stayed in. I think that the idea of having collective childcare is a good thing. However, under our current economic systems, a lot of it's being used for keeping people employed and keeping people in jobs in the current system and giving them more reason to be able to go back to work. Child and earned income tax credits is going to be helpful for some families and all that with children. Childcare funding, yeah, these are somewhat great, right? Some of this is nice. But I promise you that all of this is still going to be inadequate in terms of being able to cover the wider issues within the society. And it's not dealing with the fact that most of these corporations are still getting away with the same crap that they always have. And it's going to lead to negative outcomes for people. Even if you provide people these small little crumbs, this should be the bare minimum that we're getting. This should be the absolute minimum. This is the ultimate compromise, and this is already getting slashed. And it comes a point where we need to recognize in all of this that this has gone beyond the point of compromise for leftist ideas and for leftist projects. This has gone beyond the point of just anything that we want or require to make a society good. And these popular programs like having universal health care, the idea of keeping people, housed, of making sure and people are not starving, that people have food, that people don't have to worry about their basic necessities of life first and foremost, and that their conditions are relatively stable and good, is something that is being constantly compromised in these bills. And this is the quote unquote best they can do. This is the bipartisan infrastructure. This is the position that they've taken by capitulating to Republican interests. Not only is it not enough, it's inadequate and it's disgusting to see how little is being paid attention to and how little care is being provided for the people who do the bulk of the work, who take care of the bulk of the responsibility. And again, all the while, people are hoarding huge amounts of profit at the same time. Meanwhile, I think it just speaks volumes that in our current system, it only takes a few key bought politicians and donor backed politicians to really hold up the works and to just cut all the funding that would help provide programs that would make people's daily lives better, that would make people's long term health better, that would generally just improve the happiness and moral condition of society. And this is what happens when the state and capital intertwine under the guise of democracy. This is peak liberalism at its finest, and it is the contradiction that is inherent in the liberal philosophy that allows the authoritarian principles of capital and the owner class and the compromises of the rest of us using our, little that we have to try to survive, and recognizing those both as being equivalent and free choices. that the money that they can invest in buying out politicians and owning that in any way, shape, or form is equated to actual democracy and actual direct action is laughable at best. Meanwhile, at the same time, we allow people with immense influence and capital to just control these narratives and policy despite the wishes and needs of people calling out desperately for change. The system is broken. We need to look towards something else. And we need to start looking at ways where we can start controlling and just having a say in our lives and in the things that affect us on a daily basis again. We can't rely on corporations and the government to just keep doing it for us. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.